to bring you home, to raise you, who I could have been, who I wish I was, and the difference it would have made to the life of one innocent boy. Today on the Comic Book Report, Uncanny X-Force by Rick Remender Omnibus, the 2024 reprint. Stick around and check it out. Greetings everyone, my name is Dominic and today you're tuning in to the Comic Book Report, where we review comic books and graphic novels so you can get an idea of what to read. And today I am elated to share the review of my most anticipated comic releasing this year. That's right, we're looking at Rick Remender's Uncanny X-Force. I, like many I'm sure, missed out on my opportunity to pick up this omnibus the last time it was in print. When I heard Marvel was going to be re-releasing this edition for 2024, I simply could not wait. And I cannot wait to talk about this collection today. Before we do though, I want to shout out our channel sponsor, OrganicPriceBooks.com. If you're looking to pick up your own comic book collected editions, I highly encourage you to check out their website. You can find a link for it in this video's description, and if you see anything there you like, you can actually use my discount code at checkout, The Comic Book Report, to save $2 off of your order. Please note if you use my affiliate link or code to make a purchase, I will earn a small commission, but honestly, it's a fantastic way to support this channel. Thank you so much for considering. Now let's go ahead and get started with today's Marvel Omnibus review. First, some quick facts about today's collection. The issues in this volume were written by Rick Remender, and penciled primarily by Jerome Opeña, Esad Ribić, Phil Noto, and more. The comics in this volume were published by Marvel Comics beginning in 2010. As far as what this omnibus collects, it includes Uncanny X-Force issues 1 through 35, 5.1, 19.1, and material from Wolverine Road to Hell issue 1, All New Wolverine Saga, and X-Men Spotlight. And finally, this is an oversized hardcover edition with sewn binding, glossy paper stock, and a total of 928 pages. At this time, I'd like to go ahead and issue a general spoiler warning. I will be flipping through the contents of today's collection and commenting on plot points throughout. You've been advised. Okay, and here's our first look at today's Marvel Omnibus collection. I will say from the top, I did get the standard edition cover for this omnibus release. They did have a direct market cover. I'll go ahead and throw up a quick thumbnail just so you can compare. I personally prefer this standard edition, but I think both covers are quite striking, and honestly, I'm just happy to finally have this book in the collection. As far as the spine goes, we have this beautiful kind of black background with the sort of gray font. Really like it. It looks really crisp, clean. I like it. We have the creators and then a little picture at the bottom of the spine. Please note that the direct market, in addition to having a different cover on the dust jacket, will also likely have a different image on the bottom of the spine. Otherwise, both volumes should be identical. And on the back cover, we have another great image of the team, lifted from one of the covers to the issues included. A blurb about the collection, what it collects. We do have a parental advisory due to the kind of adult nature of this run. We have a lot of violence, mature themes, sexual situations, things like that. I wouldn't say this is the most overly graphic collection I've ever read, but I certainly understand why it has the advisory, so reader discretion advised. Okay, and now we're going to go ahead and spend one more minute with this dust jacket and examining the book itself. This time I will be showing the interior flaps so you can see a little bit more about the book and the creators, and I'll go ahead and spread out this dust jacket so you can see everything at a glance in a moment here. Like I said, this is the standard edition cover. It is my preference. I also just love that the front and back cover of the dust jacket kind of match with the color scheme, things like that. The direct market just has a different look, and that's okay, but I just really like this book. As we transition to the Under the Dust Jacket hardcover book itself, we have a nice logo printed on it for Uncanny X-Force, and we have one of the sharpest spine designs I've seen in recent memory. I love the look of the black Marvel Omnibus logo. I really wish that was on more collections, honestly. It is just striking. It all kind of has a matte black feel. And on the back, we have just some of the characters emerging from the shadows. Overall, a really great looking book. Couldn't be happier. Okay, now that we've taken care of the exteriors, I did want to transition just to show a quick look at this book's binding. I'm happy to say I think it's extraordinarily well bound. We have a nice eye in this collection, and I think the pages overall laid fairly flat. At under 1,000 pages, this isn't an overly large omnibus, and I felt like the binding was just really good. I have no complaints here on my end. Alright, and now that we've finished our look at the build of the book, we can go ahead and dive into the collection proper. As we go ahead and break into this collection, we have some kind of black end pages, a great little just front cover page there with Archangel, before going to the publication information, kind of the whole creative breakdown pages. You can see who wrote on the books, which issues, things like that. This is what we have in lieu of a traditional table of contents. We don't really have page numbers in this book or anything like that, but that creative breakdown page is quite nice. And then we honestly go straight into the collection, and it really starts with a bang. I absolutely love this book, and it's rapidly rising in my ranks of my favorite Marvel team books, and honestly, maybe in my top 10 Marvel runs of all time. Now, I'll go ahead and set up exactly what we get in this collection. If you've never read X-Force, it is in the kind of broader X-Men universe. This is a team of predominantly mutants, and X-Force in general is a moniker on runs that generally have a team that is more of the kind of special operations or black ops, kind of the darker, more lethal force friendly kind of teams. They handle kind of the gnarliest and most grisly of missions. I've read a couple different X-Force titles over the years, Benjamin Percy's run during the Krakoa era being one of my notable favorites, but this one definitely takes the cake now for my favorite X-Force runs that I've had the pleasure of reading. Now, this particular team has a pretty eclectic bunch, but I just fell in love with the team. Essentially, the team is led by Wolverine. With that, too, we have Archangel, or Angel and Archangel. They're kind of sharing one body here and there. We have Psylocke, we have fantomex, who was introduced in Grant Morrison's new X-Men run, and we have Deadpool. Along the way, we have a couple different roster changes, but this is really the core team, and I really enjoyed this team. I feel like they're all pretty intense characters on their own, and to kind of have them all in one book, it really didn't disappoint. Honestly, this roster, I got really excited when I read Thunderbolts Red, that omnibus, and I really liked all the characters on that team, but I feel like the payoff didn't really deliver as much based on the roster, and I feel like the opposite is true here. I felt like the roster, it just delivered and then some, even more than I expected. But essentially, this team comes together. There's sort of a recruitment scene, but it's pretty light on that. I would say as well at this point, when can you read this book? Is it new reader friendly? If you're like me, you've heard nothing but positive reviews for the most part about this collection, but when can you read it? I do think that this is a fascinating question. I would say overall, could a new reader pick up this series and enjoy it? Yes, I think you could, absolutely. This run feels very self-contained in many ways. It was happening during a couple different events in the Marvel Universe, but it all feels pretty, kind of what you see in this collection is what you get, and it's pretty all-encompassing. However, I will say there is a little bit of a barrier to entry, mostly in that you would want to know a little bit about a lot of these main characters. Do you have to? No, it's not absolutely essential, but having a kind of functional knowledge of the main cast definitely made the payoffs throughout this book quite a bit better. I think in particular, key characters you're going to want to know. The character of Psylocke, I think having a background on that character, same with Angel or Archangel, and in general, the villain Apocalypse and that nature and relationship with the character of Angel/Archangel, some of that background understanding or knowledge can be helpful. Even if you haven't read all of these comics, if you're just aware of those characters, I think it would help overall. I also think fantomex is a bit of a complicated character, and his introduction in the run from Morrison was really well done. So if you haven't read New X-Men, I think that's another really good example I could point to as kind of a foundational book before enjoying Uncanny X-Force. That being said, I think you could absolutely enjoy this book standalone without having some of that context, but I think that's my bare bones recommendation of just kind of having a functional knowledge of some of these main characters. I think you'll just enjoy it a bit more. And certainly the more you can know about the villain Apocalypse, I think that, again, the greater the payoffs you'll get in this book. Another thing that should be mentioned is that this run was happening around the same time as Wolverine and the X-Men by, I think, Jason Aaron, I believe, and that series is mentioned a bit here and there throughout this run. I don't necessarily think you have to read that run to enjoy this, but I think if you are familiar with that run, it makes sort of the connective tissue between the two series a bit more fun and fulfilling. I know I've dabbled with that run myself, and there were even nods to Uncanny X-Force in that run, so reading sort of the other side of the coin here, the darker side of what Wolverine's doing at the time, it just was a really cool, comprehensive experience. Okay, with that out of the way, let's go ahead and talk more about this book itself. We basically have a startup mission here, the Apocalypse Solution. I really like as well, if you've noticed as I've been flipping through, each issue has the reproduced cover along with the issue number and sort of the title or chapter of what the issue is called. I really like that. No, we don't have a full table of contents, but these issue markers function as chapter breaks and really give you a good sense of where you are, and it's just easier to index these stories when coming back. You really just know right away what story you're a part of, and I just thought it was a really nice feature on a modern omnibus. But yeah, the story when we start, we basically have this team, the Uncanny X-Force. They basically get a lead on what the four horsemen of Apocalypse are doing now that Apocalypse is presumably dead and gone. And we basically see this sort of scheme to basically clone and raise a new Apocalypse to basically take over where the previous one left off. And of course, X-Force and many of the characters included in this team were personally affected by Apocalypse. I'm looking at you, Archangel. And so obviously this team wants to dispatch and just get rid of this problem. Along the way, they fight the Horsemen along with just kind of the overall organization that's trying to do this, and it has a lot of just really intense graphic battles. Like one of the Horsemen causes like sickness and really intense illness. Anyway, they all have really brutal powers, and the team is really, I don't want to say outgunned and outmatched, but it's certainly very tense and really conflict heavy in just the best way. We have a kind of culmination of that first story arc where you realize that the Apocalypse we've been talking about is a young boy. So it kind of stages that whole argument of, would you go back in time to kill a horrific historical dictator, even if you meant you had to get them as a child? And we basically have that sort of ethical question in this run baked in right from the beginning. So of course the stakes are intense, and it's just all pretty heavy-handed. A lot of the team battles with their own morals and ethics, and many just come to the conclusion that no, we can't do that. We can't kill a young boy, even if it's a clone of a supervillain, because this clone hasn't done anything yet. They shouldn't be judged maybe by that same criteria, and everyone pretty much has that standard except for Fantomex, who decides to end that clone by shooting them in the head. And yeah, that's just the start of this book. From there, we spin out into so many other stories. I'm just going to kind of cherry pick some of my favorite in this collection, but I like that we start with the kind of re-emergence of this Apocalypse figure, because that is a presence that looms large in many ways throughout this entire run. What do I mean by that? Well, one of the stories that follows that Apocalypse Solution story arc is the Dark Angel Saga, which in my mind is perhaps the strongest in this entire collection. Essentially, throughout this book, we have this romance between Angel and Psylocke. Psylocke, of course, has these kind of psychic, psionic powers and is sort of trying to keep the Archangel, the dark personality side of Angel, locked away in a mental cage so that Angel can flourish and not be held back by his darker nature. That was sort of instilled from Apocalypse way back in the day. They have a huge shared history. Again, this is more X-Men history. But basically, Psylocke is trying to provide that to her lover and teammate here in Angel. But along the way, we have Archangel kind of scratching at the edges of that mental cage until finally he is let loose, and he just takes over completely as the dominant personality, and he's basically trying to be the new Apocalypse, and he's trying to kind of terraform the world and make mutants the superior race and all sorts of other wild experimentation. As Archangel rounds up his acolytes and puts his plans in motion, things, well, safe to say, get pretty dark pretty fast. So what is X-Force to do? Essentially, they team up with the imprisoned Dark Beast from the Age of Apocalypse storyline, and we find out that he knows something that can perhaps purge this evil persona from Angel and basically stop this new apocalypse. The unfortunate thing is that this item is only available in the Age of Apocalypse universe. So Dark Beast and the X-Force team go ahead and make the jump into that timeline. This was really fun for fans of that whole mythos, and just in general, we have kind of a multiversal story here, but it's really played straight and it just goes for the throat. There's so much action, there's so much great character interaction. We have sort of the vestiges of the resistance movement in the Age of Apocalypse that we get to have our team befriending. We have the new ruler in the Age of Apocalypse storyline, which is Weapon X, the kind of Age of Apocalypse version of Wolverine. And yeah, it's just a really fun story arc, a really fun aspect to this whole portion of the omnibus. We have some great and meaningful character development moments between our Wolverine and Age of Apocalypse's Jean Grey. We know in our main timeline, Jean Grey is no longer alive, and in Age of Apocalypse, Jean Grey was actually married to Logan, it sounds like, before he became sort of this apocalyptic dictator. So there is this kind of interesting chemistry and kindling romance between these two versions of these characters. And honestly, that's just one wrinkle or aspect of this story arc. Another one is that Kurt Wagner, Nightcrawler, was also perished in our current timeline, but in Age of Apocalypse, he's still there. This is one of the roster changes I mentioned earlier. He sort of joins X-Force after this point, which is kind of fascinating. Anyway, the team goes across the Age of Apocalypse universe after Dark Beast betrays them and leaves them stranded in this world. They find this item that can stop a apocalypse-like figure, and there's the whole argument of, okay, well, do we use it to save this current Age of Apocalypse world? Do we bring it back home? What do we do here? Anyway, the plotline advances, and ultimately X-Force gets home, and we have a final confrontation between X-Force and Archangel. This, again, is just so wonderful, and I'm not going to do it justice. You really have to read it yourself to enjoy it. But we basically have an epic final battle, and Archangel is vanquished at the hands of Betsy Braddock, Psylocke. This is really moving and just really profoundly just hard. You know, we see Psylocke take so much emotional damage throughout this run. This is honestly one of my favorite story arcs, or not story arcs, this is one of my favorite comic book runs showcasing the character of Psylocke. I think Remender did a fantastic job, not only giving her even more agency, but honestly some truly dynamic character arcs that shaped and helped shift this character. But anyway, we have that happen, and then we have a new version of Angel emerge from the distance with no memory. It's all really fascinating, and that character kind of goes off into Wolverine and the X-Men, again, if you're a fan of that series that was running in tandem. But then we move on. We move on to other stories, other places. Another story arc that happens pretty shortly after this is the Otherworld storyline. If you're a fan of the Braddocks and Captain Britain, I think that this will be a really fun story for all of you. Perhaps you're Excalibur fans, or again, you're just fans straight up of Captain Britain. Or maybe you've read X of Swords and you've learned more about the Starlight Citadel and Saturni and some of those characters. Well, this is another great one. We're in Otherworld, and we basically have Captain Britain holding fantomex on trial for his crimes, for murdering the young boy clone of Apocalypse. We have Psylocke there trying to defend fantomex against her brothers, who are basically putting him on trial. Things go really awry, however. Otherworld is not in a safe place. It's starting to be overrun by all of these villainous forces, and, you know, things come to a head pretty swiftly. We have the other members of X-Force eventually joining to try to save fantomex, but they get embroiled in their own conflict as Otherworld just kind of goes to war. This is another dark storyline that ultimately culminates with them realizing that the source of the warfare happening in Otherworld is actually Betsy Braddock's older brother, Jamie, who has a future version of himself who's kind of going back in time and going to kind of just take over the multiverse and destroy the world. So they kind of justify that, hey, he has to be killed to stop his future self from taking over the multiverse and kind of bringing the universe into darkness. This is another really, again, just sort of dark storyline. Psylocke has to make some very, very difficult choices. I don't want to spoil too much here, but the conclusion of this is just really morally interesting, and it just further compounds just the emotional trauma that Psylocke has to deal with. And we have another interesting wrinkle because we start to see the kind of chemistry between fantomex and Psylocke. We know fantomex is sort of professing his love to this character. Psylocke is still getting over Archangel, doesn't know what to do with the chemistry here, and the fact that she's coming to his defense after actually being adamantly against what he did to the boy Apocalypse. It's just a really interesting storyline. That being said, I think it's perhaps the weakest in this entire omnibus, and it's saying something that it's still a really enjoyable story. Another plot wrinkle I should bring up as well, we actually find out that fantomex has created his own clone of Apocalypse, in many ways trying to make up for what he did to the previous one. This time he's raising him in sort of an artificial environment, giving him a really solid foundation with loving parents, hoping that nurture outbeats nature as far as him being a clone of Apocalypse. And this is fantomex's maybe chance at redemption and his little experiment. And ultimately, this character, Evan, goes to the Xavier school, or the Jean Grey school, and this is, again, all part of Wolverine and the X-Men, but that character is introduced, and we get to see him recur throughout the rest of the run. And again, it's just a lot of interesting moral and ethical questions this is raising, again, just in the background. As far as the team dynamics on this book, it is really fun. I mentioned it a couple times, but I think Psylocke really has the top billing as far as character development. I would put her and fantomex near the top, but certainly all the characters are utilized exceptionally well. We have Deadpool here not only being the comedic relief, but honestly carrying a lot of heart in the title. They give him a lot of just really good shining character moments and a lot of really fun jokes. Wolverine is also apparently battling with his own darkness and his own use of lethal force. Again, his character is always super conflicted, dealing with the kind of samurai honor moral code, but also this ferocious kind of animalistic nature, and we definitely see that on full display. We have this kind of utilitarian ends justifies the means version of Wolverine in this run, and he's certainly edgy throughout and really well utilized, I think. Jumping around, our last story arc really has to do with this team, the evil Brotherhood of Mutants, trying to basically create the new Apocalypse using this clone that fantomex created. And it's a whole, will he choose the good or the dark side? And will X-Force have to repeat their arguable mistake in the first arc? Will it all happen again? What will happen in the end? There are so many other story arcs I didn't even have a chance to address, but it is really a satisfying book with some outstanding conclusions. The last story arc, along with the Dark Angel Saga, are perhaps my highlights in this entire collection, but I couldn't have loved this run more. It was so satisfying. Like I said, a bit more graphic and gruesome compared to your standard Marvel runs, but honestly, one of the best. And now, if there was an X-Men property or greater X-Men property that they would want to adapt for a great prestige miniseries or film someday, X-Force, Uncanny X-Force by Rick Remender is probably my top choice. Absolutely stunning. And the art throughout from Esad Ribić, Jerome Opeña, Phil Noto, and so many more, again, just absolutely striking. Even as we changed hands, I thought all the artwork was just absolutely gripping. You can see some of that artwork in different production stages here in the extras, along with all those variant cover galleries, transcribed interviews, and more. The extras on this collection are packed out. Really just an incredible single volume here. Again, one of my perhaps top 10 favorite Marvel comic runs of all time, and I'm so happy I finally had my chance to make my way through. I feel like I could talk about this series for hours, but I want to keep it as tight as possible where able, so I think I'll say, now that we finished the book, all that's left to do is to give this comic a grade. It should perhaps be no surprise, after I've been gushing for the last 20-25 minutes or so, that the Comic Book Report happily gives Uncanny X-Force by Rick Remender Omnibus, the 2024 reprint, an A. Yes, this is an absolutely outstanding collection that lived up to every noteworthy comment I ever heard about it and more. The art we have throughout, even as it changes hands, I think is striking and vibrant and interesting. The storylines are all great. Yes, some are maybe perhaps stronger than others, but they were all just so engaging. This is easily a book that's hard to put down. The characters are noteworthy, interesting, and honestly have some of the best takes on some of these characters characters on an individual level that I've ever read, and yes, I just adored this collection. It was well worth the wait, and I honestly am just so satisfied that my most anticipated read of the year happened to be one of my favorite reading experiences of the year. But let me know what you think of Rick Remender's Uncanny X-Force. I would love to get some discussions going in the comments, or if you have other great Remender recommendations or X-Force recommendations, let's get some recommendations going as well. And thank you so much for everyone who's been watching. This has been the Comic Book Report. Please don't forget to leave your like, comment, and maybe share this video with a friend. Thanks everyone, and have a good one.